The confidential clerk has the characters Sir Claude, Mulhammer, Eggerson, Colby Simpkins, B. Kagan, Lucasta Angel, Lady Elizabeth Mulhammer, Miss Guzzard. Act 1 is in the business room on the first floor of Sir Claude Mulhammer's London house. In the early afternoon, Sir Claude is writing at the desk, and Eggerson enters. And says, "Ah, there you are, Eggerson. Punctual as always. I'm sorry to have to bring you up to London, all the way from Joshua Park, on an errand like this." Is that the one with that ancient tree? "But you know my wife wouldn't like anyone to meet her at Northolt but you, and I couldn't send Colby. That's not the way to arrange their first meeting. On a return from Switzerland," Eggerson says. "Impossible, Sir Claude. A very delicate situation. Our first meeting with Mr. Simpkins. But I was glad of the excuse for coming up to London. I spent the morning shopping. Gardening tools, the number of things one needs for a garden, and I thought now's the moment to buy some new tools, so as not to lose a moment at the end of the winter. And I matched some material for Miss E, which she's been wanting, so she'll be pleased. Then I launched at the store. They have a restaurant, an excellent lunch, and cheap for nowadays. But where's Miss Simpkins? Will he be here?" Sir Claude says, "I had to send him to the city this morning, but he'll be back, I hope, before you leave." Eggerson says, "And how's he getting on?" "Swimmingly, I'm sure, as I've heard nothing since the last time I came." Swimmingly is a really uncommon thing that if you even hear it in the TV show, you remember, oh, that TV show. Since the last time I came. Sir Claude says, "Well, of course, Eggerson, you're irreplaceable." Eggerson says, "Oh, Sir Claude, you shouldn't say that. Mr. Simpkins is far better qualified than I was to be your confidential clerk. He was finding his feet very quickly during the time we worked together. All he needs is confidence," Sir Claude says, "and experience. With a young man, some readjustment is necessary. But I'm satisfied that he's getting the hang of things, and I think he's beginning to take a keen interest," Eggerson says, "and getting over his disappointment." "Of course, I never mentioned that. It's only what you told me," Sir Claude says, "about his music. Yes, I think so. I understand his feelings. He's, like me, Eggerson. The same disappointment, in a different form. He won't forget that his great ambition was to be an organist, just as I cannot forget, no matter. The great thing was to find something else he could do and do well, and I think he found it, just as I did. I shall tell him about myself, but so far I've left him to his own devices. I thought he would fall into this way of life more quickly if we started on a purely business basis," Eggerson says. "No doubt that's best. Well, he's still living, with his aunt in Teddington, and coming up daily, just as I used to. And the flat in the Mews. How soon will that be ready for him?" Sir Claude says. "They have still to do the walls, and then it must be furnished. I'm trying to find him a really good piano." Eggerson says, "A piano?" "Yes, I'm sure he'll feel at home when he has a piano. You think of everything. But if I might make a suggestion, window boxes. He's expressed such an interest in my garden that I think he ought to have window boxes. Some day he'll want a garden of his own, and yes, a bird bath." Sir Claude says, "A bird bath in the Mews? What's the point of that?" Eggerson says, "He told me he was very fond of bird watching." Sir Claude says, "But there won't be any birds, none worth watching." Eggerson says, "I don't know, Sir Claude. Only the other day I read a letter in the Times about wild birds seen in London, and I'm sure Miss Simpkins will find them, if anyone." Sir Claude says, "Well, we'll leave that for the present, as we have a little time. Before you start for Northolt, the car will be ready. Let's think what you're to say to Lady Elizabeth, coming back from the airport about Colby. I think you ought to give her warning of whom she is to meet on her arrival, Egerton says. And how would you like me to approach the subject? Sir Claude says. Of course she knows you were wanting to retire, as we had some discussion about replacing you. But you know, she regards you, well, completely, as one of the household, Egerton says. That's a great compliment, Sir Claude says, and very well deserved, but rather inconvenient. When it comes to appointing a successor, makes it very difficult to replace you. She thinks she ought to have a hand in the choosing. And besides, she is convinced that she, of all people, is a better judge of character than I am. Egerton says, Oh, I wouldn't say that, Sir Claude. But she has too much respect for your business genius. But it's true she believes she has what she calls a guidance. Sir Claude says, Guidance? That's worse than believing in her judgment. We could argue about that. You can't argue with guidance. But if she appears to be puzzled or annoyed at my making the appointment during her absence, you must say you had to leave under medical orders. She's always been concerned about your state of health, so she'll be sympathetic. And as for Colby, say that Mr. Simpkins was highly recommended, and say that I had to make a quick decision because he'd had another very tempting offer, something like that. Don't make too much of it, and I rather hope that she will take to him at once. If so, she is certain to come to believe that she chose him herself. By the way, don't forget to let her know that he's very musical. She can take him to concerts, but don't overdo it. And it's important to realize whatever the guidance is, it's still your responsibility what you believe or do about it. Egerton says, I'll remember that. Music, Sir Claude says. And by the way, how much have you actually told him about her? You remember I asked you to prepare him a little. There are some things you could say better than I could, and in ways in which you could reassure him better than I. He's more at ease with you than he is with me. Egerton says, Oh, you mustn't say that. Though I've done my best to gain his confidence, I did mention her interest in light from the East, Sir Claude says. And the Book of Revelation? And the wisdom of Atlantis? Okay, yeah, they mean what I thought. Egerton says, Well, to tell the truth, Sir Claude, I only touch on these matters. They're much too deep for me, and I thought, Mr. Simpkins, he's highly educated. He'll soon begin to grasp them. No, I haven't told him much about Lady Elizabeth, but there's one thing I should like to know. If you don't mind, before I go to meet her, how soon do you propose, explain to Mr. Simpkins, regularize his position in the household? You told me that was your eventual intention. Sir Claude says, When, or indeed whether I reveal his identity, depends on how she takes to him. This afternoon she will only learn that you have finally retired, and that you have a young successor, a Mr. Colby Simpkins. Edgar says, Merely Mr. Simpkins.